Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to a new episode. So, today, as promised, we have a new dilemma for you that we want to discuss and help you out with. It's going to be on the topic of money because you know how much we love talking about money. But I'm just going to start with reading it out. And if you guys want to get involved in future dilemma episodes, all you have to do is make sure you're following Dev and I on our Instagrams. And we often post some question box stories where you can actually send in your dilemmas, or you can send them via DM and we'll pick them up and discuss them in an episode. So if you like the sound of that and you want a bit of advice or just sisterly tips on anything really, then yeah, definitely drop us a DM. So the one we're going to discuss today, and let me read it out for you. It says, I feel like I'm a bit too financially responsible, in brackets stingy, to the point where I feel like spending on myself is a waste of money. I'm trying to build my savings so I can buy a house, but I also do want to enjoy life, just not sure how to. This is such a good question because I think this is something that I asked myself for quite a long time in terms of like that feeling of guilt of treating yourself or doing things for yourself, knowing that you have these big financial goals and things you want to achieve and how to balance the two. But with us both having bought properties, I've now also had my wedding, and I feel like we're both, I would say, in a good stage of knowing when and how much we want to give back to ourselves as opposed to saving for all these other goals. Would you say you're in a similar situation? And
yeah, definitely in a similar situation, and also relate to, having those goals, but then struggling to prioritize yourself at the same time.
At what point did you make that shift then? Let's talk about that. So starting off as that person that felt guilty to spend on themselves and felt like they had to be stingy when it came to themselves because they knew that they had these bigger goals in mind. How did you make that transition from being like that to where you are now?
When I was leading up to buying my flat, I definitely had more of that mindset of like, if I spend a penny on myself, it's a penny wasted because it's not going towards the house. But actually, the shift came when, to be honest, I bought the place and I realized that I had no other goals.
Damn.
Yeah. Because for me, like the flat goal came about really fast, and then we purchased it quite quickly in terms of like the Edinburgh market. And then once it finished, I was like, oh, I don't really know what else I have to save for, like what else I want to spend for. So then I struggled like even having a plan for my money and like having that responsibility be applied now that I was almost directionless. And I think that's been something that like has really reframed how I can actually spend money on myself. It's actually like having that goal and having something to work towards, and then knowing that because you have one thing that you're working towards, the rest is kind of like it's fair game because it's your life. And that's the kind of approach I've taken, and it has taken like getting over the hump of achieving that goal to then realize that you don't always have to be saving, and that if you do feel like that, like that kind of grab everything you can, don't let it go mindset, it speaks more to I've got issues with money rather than I don't have anything to spend on right now, or I don't have any goals to be saving for right now. So kind of confronting that mindset also helped me in terms of spending more money. But what about you? Because I feel like you're more responsible than me in terms of like I struggle to like I bounce between like saving too much and then spending too much in the name of life is short. But I feel like you're quite good at like what you would struggle with more is the spending aspect.
Yeah, that's true. And it's definitely something that I've preached a lot before is I I think I just became very good at being able to balance them because I became very quickly obsessed with tracking my finances very early on. And that is when I guess I it started because I had that big financial goal of buying my first property. So when I started that mission, I needed to know in advance how long it was going to take me. And the only way that I could do that was by seeing how much money I get every month, how much money I'm spending every month, and then working out like what I had left over to save. and then how many months I would need essentially to save the chunk of money to pay for the deposit. So I was very practical and logical in that aspect in terms of being sure of like how much money I needed for this property to then achieve that goal. But then also during that time, I did have the kind of mindset, and I guess it does come from an abundance mindset as well, and knowing that money that you spend is not necessarily negative. Like money is always going to come back to you. So I always try to practice the idea of like just being focused on the gratitude that I get to do those things. So, but still compromising at the same time. So, for example, throughout those couple of years that I was saving for my first property, there was a lot of things that I probably did cut back on, but I still wanted to do things like traveling, for example. And that was still something that I wasn't going to wait 3-4 years before I went on my next holiday. Like there were certain things that I still wanted to live life and experience while still trying to work towards this big goal that obviously needed a lot of money. So I would just compromise and spend holidays that were max 2-3 nights. I'd stay in Europe and I would just do like weekend breaks and things like that. Obviously, I wasn't going to go fly to Asia or do these massive like holidays, and I'd never done one of those actually. That this year will be the first time I'm actually doing one of those big holidays, because before that, I know it's so exciting. But before that, I had these big financial goals. Like we literally just got married as well. So when you do have those goals in mind, yes, I get the pressure and I get the struggle of having to cut back on other things. But you have to remind yourself that you don't have to cut back completely, and you can compromise with things. Like you can still do the things you want to do on a smaller scale. You don't necessarily have to cut them out altogether. You'll still reach that goal, and you might reach it that little bit slower. But realistically, like spending a weekend away, like you could eat that money quite easily. Like getting a couple of takeaways during the week will be the same equivalent money these days as like getting a plane ticket. You can get really cheap plane tickets. And I'm just using that as an example. Obviously, if travel isn't the thing that you're talking about here, then it'll be something else. But all I'm saying is, like, okay, yes, don't go get that designer bag while you're trying to save for your first property. Like, there are certain things that you can tell yourself, like, it's not reasonable to expect both at the same time. But there are ways of doing things a bit differently to ensure that you're still living your life and you're still, getting the experiences that you want to get. You're still spending time with friends. So like, for example, when you talked about doing 75 hard and you had to cut a lot of stuff out, you still, like when we talked about that in a previous episode, you talked about how you still see those friends, but you do stuff that didn't involve like drinking, and you went on walks or you did other things, that you still spent time with the people that you cared about. And you still saw your friends, for example. You just switched activities because you were in that space where it required that.
Yeah. And I think what you've spoken on there is like two really important things to consider if you have a big saving goal. Like one thing is, what are the wants and needs in your life? Like what are the absolute necessary things you need to be spending money on? And then what are the wants? So you have to like make that distinction first. And then when you take the wants, then you need to apply like a values mindset to those wants. So like if we take your example of traveling versus getting takeaway food, if traveling is a massive value for you in terms of like that's something you really get a lot of joy back from, or experiences really adds value to your life, and that, then you can start applying that, like what you said earlier in terms of like an abundance mindset. And I think we've spoken on this in previous episodes. It's like when you spend money, if you view it as like an exchange of things, or maybe energy might be too woo-woo of a word to use for this episode, but you're exchanging things when you're spending money, right? And if you're spending money on travel, you're exchanging funds, cash, for an experience. Whereas if you're spending money on takeaway food, you're exchanging cash for food. Pre-cooked, convenient food that's probably delicious. So it just depends on like what your values are and whether you see that exchange as something that is valuable to you or not, because then that can determine like how you choose to spend money in a way that doesn't make you feel like you're wasting it. Because if you think about like, if you've got this goal and you're saving for this goal, there's probably only so much you can save before you do kind of feel a bit miserable. And then it also just depends on how really like close to your own heart and how tied up to your own values that goal actually is associated to as well. Because you were saving for your flat, but then you felt like you still needed to get those experiences and those holidays in. So getting the flat like 6 months sooner wasn't actually that big of a deal to you. Like that's what I'm hearing from like your journey saving for it. And I could probably say the same thing about my goal buying here. Like we didn't give anything up per se to be able to buy, but we spent like a decent amount of time being quite what's the right word, like neat or like reasonable with our finances as well. We weren't going crazy. We were watching our transactions and stuff like that. And other people are very different. Like I've seen these really cool house or like home transformations on TikTok where the people who bought those rundown places to kind of do them up, they're just really passionate about owning their own place, making it their own, and just like getting in there as fast as possible and starting that journey. So for them, they spent like, I've seen so many people who have just gone back, lived with their parents and lived on like beans and bread and rice just so that they can get their hands on their big financial goal sooner, rather than like spreading that out and kind of living their life in between that. So that's like a personal choice. Like that's not like a you're right if you do it one way and you're wrong if you don't do it the other way. It just depends how emotionally linked you are to your goal, and also time, from a time aspect as well.
If you are someone that is in the habit of being quite financially stingy with yourself, but you want to be that person that is a bit more forgiving financially to yourself, in terms of you want to treat yourself a bit more and you want to feel okay about it, what is your advice from that perspective? Not necessarily dealing with the I'm going to compromise and I'm going to do, you know, the bare minimum for myself in the name of getting this goal complete. How would you suggest someone goes from being that person to being a bit more lax with themselves in terms of what they can do for themselves in the meantime?
I think it's important to figure out what your values are with money, and like what gives you, actually, you don't remove money. What do you feel really happy about when you do, like in your life? Do you like eating really good meals? Do you like going on nice trips? Do you like treating yourself to nice local experiences? Like what is it about life that makes you feel like life is full and like it has purpose and stuff? And then for those things, just reframe your mindset on when you spend money on those, you're getting more of that back into your life. And this like viewing things as an exchange, because I've mentioned it already, like that's the thing that's really transformed my ability to spend money in a way that like when I spend more on things, I know it's because I'm getting so much more back than just the cash I'm parting with, if that makes sense as well. So it's a way to reframe the fact that like your bank account might be getting smaller, but what other areas of your life are getting bigger, and never forgetting about that part that's getting bigger. What about you? How do you think you've gotten better at spending money?
Yeah, I would say so. I would say I have. Probably because of Sonny, my husband. He has no problem spending money, but I think he just has that mindset of, because we had this conversation a while ago now, and it was about takeaways actually, because the obscene amount of money he spends on eating out it's still crazy to me. But I don't know, he just made this point once, and I was like, because obviously we were saving for our wedding and we obviously have these other big financial goals as a couple. And when we'd have these money chats, I would say, I'm always thinking about what can we cut back, but he's always thinking, how am I making more money? And I think that's a really good,
that's really great mindset.
Yeah. So I feel like we have the opposite. Well, I'm trying to get into the habit of having that mindset more often, because I think that's a really crucial, important mindset to have when it comes to money, especially, is the idea of, okay, if I need more money and I don't want to compromise on the things that I have right now, then how am I going to make more? But I always automatically think, well, what have I got right now that I can cut back on to save more money? So we were having this discussion, and so my immediate thought went to, well, if we need more money to save for X, Y, and Z, then we need to stop eating out so much. And, we need to like do that one grocery shop and then have that last us the week, like most people probably do. But he was so adamant that that's not like, it's so negligible, like that money, but it does that definitely add up. So I still agree that it's money that could be saved. But he basically made the point, he was like, well, I enjoy eating that food and that's just part of my routine now. So, and it's quick, it's convenient, like we've got busy days. So I'd rather focus on making more money and not focus on the fact that that's like we need to cut back on anything in our life that we're already doing. And that was just his mindset. And I was like, actually fair. Like that's also a good mindset to have in terms of course, like there's things that you can cut back on, and I still believe that we could eat less takeaways and, save a bit of money back. But the principle is you do just kind of have to decide like what it is that you are happy to spend money on, and he's happy to spend money on food. So like then the question becomes, well, if I need more money for something, then I'll find another way to get it. And also any money I spend will always come back to me. I think that's something that I've tried to preach to myself a lot in recent years, is this idea of, like you're talking about, money is an exchange. But as much as you spend, if you have the mindset that as much as I'm spending, it will always come back, it will. But if you're looking at money, and again, it's that money mindset stuff is so important, because it's about the idea of, if you're constantly feeling guilty for that idea of losing money, like if you're in the mindset where you're losing money every time you spend it, then you're attracting that idea of not having enough money.
So true.
And if you're in that mindset of, oh, I don't have enough money and I'm losing it now because I'm spending it on this thing and I feel guilty about spending it, when actually it's something as well that's meant to make you feel fulfilled and happy. Because if you are spending on yourself and feel guilty for it, it's kind of having the opposite effect of what it should have. And you shouldn't really be feeling guilty, well, within reason as well. Like I have to emphasize, you still do have to be very cautious with your money and smart with it if you're wanting to achieve these goals. Like they're not going to happen by you, spending silly in the name of, I'm treating myself. You have to budget and you have to be like sensible, but that doesn't mean that you have to like give up things that are important to you. Like Dev mentioned, like things, when you figure out what those values are and what's important to you and what makes you feel fulfilled on a day-to-day, if you keep those at the core and you make sure that I'm going to do these things and I'm going to feel good about it because those things actually make me feel good, and I'm going to trust that when I spend that money, I'm going to lift my own vibration, I'm going to have a good energy about me, which means I'm in a better place to receive the things that I want anyway. I feel like that's the mindset shift you should have. So then when you do go and spend that money, you stop feeling guilty and feel like, oh, now I've set myself back and I'm going to have to wait an extra month to go get this thing that was a bigger goal. So I guess what I'm saying is it comes down to mindset a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, no, it really, really does. And like, I think with this scarcity mindset as well, it's very cyclical. Like if you are sitting there thinking that you need to hoard every penny possible because there isn't enough money out there in the world to keep you afloat if anything went wrong, you will never get anywhere. Like Farah says, like you won't attract more. Whereas if you have that mindset and you spend a little bit in this kind of like exchange way where you're getting something good back, then you're making your day-to-day life more, I was going to say less miserable, but I want to say instead like more purposeful. And the more that your day-to-day life has purpose, the less you have time to worry about having enough. And like the less you have time to be worrying about penny pinching and not spending on yourself. And it's that kind of cycle. It's like a vicious cycle, but the opposite of vicious. It's a good cycle. Whereas if you spend more, you feel more content and you feel less of a need to hoard more as well. And you start to build that sense of abundance and that sense of, okay, the world hasn't ended because I spent a little bit of money on myself. and you slowly build that kind of confidence in your ability to spend money but not blow it all, and you'll still be fine at the end of the day, because there is, like Farah said, there is a fine balance between spending as much as you can because you feel like the world doesn't have enough money for you, and also saving as much as possible because you feel like the world doesn't have enough money for you. Like, there's both ends of the spectrum, and you have to be somewhere in the middle where your day to day is really nice. You have gratitude for your day to day, you have purpose in your day to day, and you don't have enough time to worry about how little or lots you're saving or spending.
Shall we talk about then, in the name of financial goals, how to actually save for one in the first place? And there's so many different goals as well that you can have that obviously will need different amounts of money and different amounts of time that it'll take. But I feel like the main ones that always come up in general is saving for a property or saving for a wedding. I feel like those are probably the most popular, and often have the biggest amounts of money attached to them in terms of how much you need up front. And I guess we both have the experience of saving for properties, and I've only just come out of the wedding bubble and all the finances attached to that, which was painful a little bit, but but I think in the name of saving for a financial goal in general, where do you start?
So with financial goals, I love to start backwards. Like, a big financial goal as well that I overcame in my 20s was paying off like about 6k worth of credit card debt. And for me, that was a financial goal that I was only able to hit because I took the happy ending and like worked backwards from that. And I think this applies to most end goals, for most financial goals, I think, as well. I think for property or wedding, your like the amount you would need to hit that financial goal is probably a bit more like approximate, I would say. It's not as final as maybe, you know, having that figure of credit card debt, or having that figure of actually maybe even property, you'd have like a more approximate figure. But I took that, and then I also, an alternative to having an end goal and working backwards for me is like thinking about how much time you have to save for that goal as well. And then a little bonus bit I think is like, what things can you do to like top up your journey to that financial goal and like hit it a bit faster? Because I think sometimes we discount, we're kind of like I think to my to when I paid off my credit card debt, I think back to that and I'm like, I just picked the amount. I knew I had like X amount of months to clear that debt. Kind of sat back and set up my standing order, and of course, like, I did it. But I feel like I could have taken more initiative to think about, okay, what can I sell around me? What can I sell in my house? What can I get rid of some of my clothes? Can I set up like a little side hustle? Can I go walk some local dogs? You know, like random little things where I have this goal in mind, which means I know that like any extra money and work that I can earn or do can go towards it. So why not try and, you know, like top it up a bit faster? So I think there's kind of like three routes I would take to setting a big financial goal, as well as, you know, like, I don't want to underestimate making sure that the goal is something that you're picking and you don't feel like you have to do, because big financial goals are big financial goals. They take a lot of commitment. They take a lot of your disposable income, because this is stuff that you could be spending or saving for things that you actually want to do, that you're saving for something that potentially you're being pressured to do or you think is like a goal. So I really encourage you to think about your financial goals and like, do you really want them?
Yeah.
Like, are they goals of your own?
That's true. I think, when it comes to, it's maybe the expectations of, oh, you should have your house by now, or you should be married by now, and are those things that maybe are like questions in your own mind of whether you want that for yourself. That's probably a good place to start. But I think in general, I feel like a lot of people's aim, like a lot of people want to have that moment of having their own property and owning a home for the first time at least. So I definitely think, you know, what's the first thing I did was actually just like actually create a pot for it. as in like this is my house pot, like money pot. And when I say that, I mean on like a banking app.
Like separate it.
Yeah, separate it entirely, so that becomes a solidified, like I can see that amount increase every single time I put money into it now. It's not just in a generic savings account where all my other like emergency fund and my just my general savings are lumped together.
And also you can't accidentally spend it.
Mm-hmm.
And by accident, I also mean on purpose.
Accidentally on purpose dip into that whenever I feel like I need a top up on my current account. Yeah, because what happens is when you are saving generally, like the amount of times, yeah, in my normal savings account, I will dip into it whenever I need to, because I transfer all of my money into my savings account pretty much, except for like, you know, things that I know are going to come out of from direct debits and things. So if you don't have that other separate pot set up, then you don't actually know how much money you've got for your goal to begin with. And it's so hard then to keep adding to it and knowing how you're progressing. So I feel like that's a really underrated tool if you do have access to setting up a separate pot, because I feel like a lot of the more online banking providers or the newer ones allow for that more than the traditional banks, because to set up a new savings account with a traditional bank is a bit of a headache and a half versus a pot.
Which is why I potentially even say, like, sometimes I'm like, I would go the harder route, because sometimes the harder it is to set up an account, the harder it is to even transfer money between those accounts as well. So you're less likely to be like last minute under pressure impulsively taking money out of that thing because you want to spend it on something. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like the easier it is to set up, equally it's easier to also spend that and also just like, you know, dissolve that account as well. But it is super important to separate those accounts. Yeah, I really second that.
You also can get those pots or those accounts that you can lock, or savings accounts where you actually can't touch that money for like 12 months. And they have those in like their terms and conditions. So if you are the type of person that really struggles with dipping into those savings accounts, then those options are there where you physically cannot touch it once you put that money in. So there are ways that you can kind of make sure that you're sticking to your goals and being disciplined via being forced into it.
Tools.
Yeah. Essentially. But I think that is also so motivating to see that pot grow as well as you're putting money in every single month. And then the next step I would say is like figure out that budget or that amount of money that you're going to put in every single month, because when you do that, then like you said before, how you worked backwards from your credit card debt, you would do the same thing. I guess for a wedding it's a bit trickier because you actually, like, we ended up spending double our budget by the end. So weddings are so difficult to plan for. But when it comes to a house, if you already have a house in mind and if you've already kind of looked into it, you'll know the value of it and you'll know hopefully how much deposit you can put down for it. So if you have that figure in mind, then you would work backwards and see, okay, well, how long do I have to save up that amount of money? And then you can look at budgeting month on month. How much will you have left over to put aside? And then you'll be able to see how many months you would need to do that for. And when you figure that number out up front, sometimes you're actually quite surprised at how quick it will be to reach that goal.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Because when you're spreading it across like a couple of years or a year, depending on the amount of money, of course, you then start to realize that actually it is doable, because you're not looking at that massive figure that you have to, you know, save up eventually. You're looking at the month on month incremental amounts of money, which you can put aside each month. And I would always say, like, don't be so something that I struggle with at some points in my journey while I was saving up is that if I couldn't put a certain amount of money in that pot that month for whatever reason, like if I had, you know, like an emergency expense for something else, or at that point I don't think I even had an emergency fund, so my savings was my emergency fund, which is also a really bad idea. Have a separate emergency fund for stuff that actually comes up, because then you don't have to dip into your other things and your goals and like other stuff that you're actually saving for to buy things. So if I did have less money, then I'd kind of like tell myself there was no point saving out all that month. I would just write it off. But you should be putting at least something in every single month when it comes to like your savings goals, because if you then stop that momentum, even if it's like a little bit less than what you're used to putting in, it becomes really hard to pick yourself back up and then feel motivated to carry on towards that goal.
No, that's a really good point. I think I was just thinking there as well, like if you didn't have a savings goal, or you feel like, you know, you don't want property, you don't have a wedding, I feel like an emergency fund is a really great goal that you can't really have. I feel like there's no ideal ceiling for an emergency fund. Like the bigger the emergency fund, the better. Like the more crazy of an emergency you can actually be safer from as well. But yeah, I highly recommend actually separating those accounts, and also separating the different goals into different accounts as well. I think one thing I really think is super key that I didn't really realize until I started doing it is, you know, the pay yourself first concept, in terms of utilizing standing orders or like automatic transfers, whatever it is that your bank offers to. So like once you figured out the amount that Farah referenced in terms of like the amount you can commit to in your monthly budget, or the amount required to reach your goal in your desired number of months, once you have that final number, you plug that into your standing order and you set that up to come out like literally the moment you're paid. So you never actually see that. It's almost like your pay slip money. It's like the tax you pay. You shouldn't be seeing that money, because it means that your goals are prioritized over whatever you impulsively decide to do in a month, which is very easy to like spend. If you sent yourself your money that you wanted to put away for your savings, it's so much harder for you to see it and then put it manually into your savings. Like you'll be tempted to spend that every single month. And it's just a nice way to also just honor your goals and be like, look, this is being taken care of before I decide to do anything else during my month, because this is a priority for me. This is my goal. This is something I really want to achieve.
You're so right about that. And that's something that I actually noticed when I started investing, because I was terrible at actually prioritizing that and making sure that I was doing that month on month, until I did set up that direct debit, and it just took the money straight out of my account. There was no thinking necessary, because it took the thinking out of it when it's literally just leaving your account and paying for that thing. So that is such an important like tool to use if you are an overthinker, or you're just, you know, you think your emotions will get the better of you one month and you have something else that you think, oh, would be worth putting that money towards more. If you have those things in practice and in place, then you don't really get the choice. It's just like that is dealt with, and now you have to work with what you've got left, and you just have to. And when you are put in that situation, you do make it work as well. Like even if you could have done with that extra £200, now that you don't have it and it's stuck in that account, you have to make it work. Like with the rest of your salary.
Yeah, and I think we naturally do that as well. I'm sure it's called like a thresholds, it's like a psychological concept, like thresholds theory or something like that, where we get used to certain thresholds in our life. Like we'll get you like with our friends, family relationships, there's loads of things where we're just used to a certain level of something, and it applies directly to your money as well. So if you're used to a level of savings in your current account, or a level of savings in your actual savings accounts, if it goes up or down, like psychologically, apparently we will do things to get it either back down if it's too high, or get it back up if it's too low. And if you remove the ability for you to actually spend that money, you'll make do, because that's just what you'll naturally end up doing. That's what I did to myself as well. So yeah, that's really important.
Okay, well, hopefully this was a really helpful episode. I hope the person that wrote in this dilemma has a bit of a better idea of how they can start treating themselves a little bit more while working towards their financial goals. And in general, if any of you have any financial goals that you're working towards, how you can put in good practices and good steps in place to make sure that you're being consistent and you're staying disciplined on track with those goals. Let us know if you did enjoy the episode by commenting on YouTube and giving us a thumbs up if you're watching us over on there. Give us a rating if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts.
And we will see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.